I've got an interesting relationship with the Resident Evil franchise, the main thing being that I saw the first film adaptation and all of its sequels before I ever played any of the games. I mean, I tried playing them like once when I was a child. I remember attempting to play, I think it was Code Veronica on PS2, but I just couldn't. Not because I was scared or anything, but just because I could not get to grips with the gameplay. It was far too complicated for me, and I gave up trying after a bit. Look, cut me some slack, alright? I had a very particular taste in video games back then. I just wanted to freely kill zombies and have a fun time. I wasn't interested in puzzle solving and inventory management and fucking ink ribbons. I was essentially looking for Dead Rising before I knew Dead Rising was a thing. So I just assumed that every Resident Evil game would be like this and ignored the games as they went on. And despite watching the movies as they released, I somehow still never gained much more knowledge of the games themselves. So I just got to enjoy the absolute cluster fruitcake of a fever dream that is this series of films. Now, I will admit right away, as a gormless wee boy, I did genuinely, unironically, enjoy these movies. Well, the first three at least. I did have some fucking standards, you know. And by the time the final chapter had come out, I was old enough to admit that I thought these movies were mostly complete dreck. Although I did still enjoy them, but for different reasons. However, even then, the only real knowledge that I had of the games was that the games, or the originals at the very least, were considered much more horror oriented than the movies were, and the original game itself was considered the genesis of the survival horror genre as a whole. But then the year 2020 happened, where for whatever reason I wasn't going to the cinema as much as I used to, and I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I started gaming a little bit more than usual, and I decided to give Resident Evil another chance. So for several months I committed to and played through every Resident Evil game. Well, alright, not every Resident Evil game, just every mainline entry up till Village, and then I played the remakes. But I still haven't played the 4th remake yet. But interestingly, although I had a wonderful time and have become a pretty big fan of the games in the process, I made a shocking discovery. Something I did not know about the Resident Evil games, and that is, they are goofy as fuck.
Oh, Joe, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Oh, I'm hurt! Oh, my neck! My back! My neck and my back! Oh!
Now, before any res heads out there grab their torch and pitchforks, I do not mean that as an insult or a criticism, because I fucking love the campy goofiness of the Resident Evil franchise. But for so many years, I was under the impression that the Resident Evil games were like pure horror. And don't get me wrong, it is pure horror, but it's a very specific type of pure horror, namely B. Now I know, it was easy being a guy living in the year 2020, looking at games for the late 90s and saying, these are so campy. And I thought that myself when I first played through them. I was like, do you know what? Let's just see where this franchise goes when it jumps ahead a console generation, because that's really when things started to hit their stride, especially for horror games. And then I played Code Veronica, which was even campier and sillier than the first three.
We're safe now. Think again, Claire.
I shall enjoy watching you shriek in agony.
And then you get to Resident Evil 4, and they are just fully embracing the nonsensical lunacy of everything at that point.
I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
Now, as for the film adaptations, they are largely detested by most people, I would say. And look, I get why. For me, they range from just guilty pleasure nonsense to so bad they're actually enjoyable, to so incomprehensibly terrible that it's no longer enjoyable. All of that being said though, I think the first film is genuinely solid. I don't even think that's much of a hot take these days, because I feel I've heard more and more people share that opinion. Now maybe that's just because the quality of the subsequent films give this one a bit more credence, but I personally have always genuinely liked the first movie, and my opinion on it has never really shifted all that much. And even when I eventually played through most of the games, I actually grew to appreciate it a bit more. So, quick wee bit of backstory. The script for a Resident Evil movie was floated around a couple of people back in the late 90s, including the godfather of the dead himself, George A. Romero, which I've always found kind of funny because the Resident Evil games were heavily inspired by Romero's own Of the Dead series, which basically pioneered the zombie genre. The script apparently went through multiple iterations before ultimately being rejected, and after a couple of years of being up in the air, Paul W.S. Anderson was eventually brought on board, which made sense because he did make the most well-received and financially successful video game movie, at the time at least, with 1995's Mortal Kombat, which I talked about recently. Now look, I get why this movie was maligned at the time, and I suppose still is to a degree, but much less so, I would say, nowadays. I get the obvious criticisms, like it doesn't feature any characters from the games, a lot of the iconic monsters are just completely omitted, it doesn't take place in the Spencer mansion, nobody ever mixes a bunch of multicoloured herbs together, nobody ever spends over 2 hours running in and out of a bunch of empty rooms you've already cleared looking for a key item that turns out was on you the whole time, but you have to rotate the book in your inventory system to a specific angle to get the stupid key item hidden inside. And no, I didn't want to pick up another fucking ink ribbon. It also came out in the same year as the first game's remake, which is widely considered one of the best games in the series. It looked, sounded and played incredible, especially compared to its PS1 counterpart, so that might have added to the fanbase's disdain for this adaptation. But aside from those things, the film just had a very different aesthetic and style from the games of the time. The only mainline games in the series at that point were 1, 2, Nemesis, and Code Veronica. These games either took place in broken down streets of chaos or massive old-fashioned buildings with elaborate puzzles everywhere, whereas this movie was very contemporary. Well, contemporary for 2002 anyway. Everything for the cast to the overall design, it had that very slick early 2000s design. It was the post-Matrix era where media was just obsessed with the advancement of digital computer technology. Holographic projections, graphic map displays, advanced camera POVs, all the rooms have that very sleek modern look. It's all metal and glass, just reflective surfaces everywhere. The weapons are these big angular clunky machine guns. Everybody's wearing black with only minimal pops of singular bright colours. It's like a Liberty X music video. But despite the dramatic aesthetic differences from the games, I think the spirit of Resident Evil is still very much within this movie, at least as far as the first few games go anyway. Now I know because there were 4 entire games to draw from at this point, it does beg the question, why isn't any of that here? None of the characters, none of the storylines, none of the locations. Well, the reason for this is because this was originally imagined as a prequel set within the game's continuity, which for a while was titled Resident Evil Ground Zero, which had to be changed because I think you know the reason.
There were 2 towers that stood right here, and they're gone.
Now, I don't know when it actually stopped being the case that this was in fact a prequel, whether it was mid-production, post-release, or when the sequel got greenlit, but it honestly kind of works. Bearing in mind, there are only 4 games in the series at this point. If you look at this movie on its own as taking place a significant amount of time before the events of the first game, and the last few minutes has taken place during the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3, it lines up quite nicely. So I don't really know why they decided to change their mind about that. It's worth noting as well that as well as the first game's remake, this also came out the same year as Resident Evil Zero, which was a more direct prequel to the first game. So maybe that had something to do with it, but given that they were released so close to each other, it seems unlikely that the filmmakers would have had much knowledge of the concurrent development of a new game. But even as a thing of its own, I think it mostly works. It wasn't redefining the genre or anything like that. That would be 28 Days Later's thing, which came out not too long after this. Now look, I will admit, I do think as far as zombie movies go, even at the time, this is a pretty tame affair in terms of violence and gore. I'm not saying that every zombie movie has to be a complete gorno, but you're expecting some zombie carnage. Maybe a jugular getting tore the fuck out, maybe some dismemberment, or at least a disembowelment of some kind. Oh Christ, I sound like a fucking psycho. But regardless, I do think that this is a genuinely fun, isolated zombie movie that makes good use of its limited budget, and even though it is significantly more well behaved compared to other zombie movies, it does still have a decent combination of suspense, horror, atmosphere, and while managing to be enough of its own thing, does still adhere to the games. So the plot is that after a viral outbreak occurs inside a secret underground facility called the Hive, which is run by the shadiest of shady organisations, Umbrella, the AI that oversees the facility locks everybody in and kills them to prevent the virus from reaching the surface. Shortly thereafter, Umbrella sends in a commando unit to investigate what happened, only to discover that the staff are now a bunch of reanimated crack addicts who haven't had their fix for a few days and are willing to substitute it with a healthy dose of your guts. And they only have a couple of hours to escape before the entrance to the facility completely shuts down and automatically seals them all in there for good. It's a relatively simple premise that feels decidedly Resident Evil. The setup is really effective and foreboding. Even people who hate this movie usually have at least 2 nice things to say about it. The opening scene and a scene we'll get to later. But the intro's great. Like, I really like how it just very quickly and intensely sets everything up. It establishes several faces, locations and mysteries that will come back later. I like how you see all the Dobermans in the cages. Most of the staff members you see make a reanimated reappearance later. And this elevator scene is just pure nightmare fuel. Although I will say, I do agree with what Michelle Rodriguez said in the commentary for this scene.
Although when we were shooting it, it just looked terrifying.
Yeah,
because...
I cannot imagine having that much trust.
I wanted to see her head get chopped
I mean,
off.
because just in case Indra, who's the actress, her head snapped forward, the floor was just made out of very lightweight plastic.
Ah! See, I wanted to see that. What happened, Paul? This is rated R. Gore? Hello? Well, why didn't we see her head get chopped off and
drop
blood?
of blood, we wouldn't even be rated R.
It's a movie that just starts and doesn't really stop. Well, I mean, it kinda stops when we're introduced to Alice and she wanders the mansion for a couple of minutes, but even then it's still part of a mystery because we don't know who she is or how it connects to what we just saw, and she doesn't know what the fuck's going on either. Yes, it's one of those stories, it's an amnesia thing, which is a common storytelling trick to withhold information from the audience, and Alice gets to do the whole routine of I'm a hard arse without knowing I'm a fucking hard arse, and the bad guy gets to be the bad guy for the majority of the runtime. I'll come back to this guy though. Honestly, look, it's kinda a cheap trick, but it's nowhere near the worst example of an amnesia gimmick I've seen done in a movie. Alright, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Anyway, before you have a chance to get comfortable with the quiet emptiness of the mansion, the commando umbrella sanitation unit come crashing through the windows with such aggression that you would think they were just regular police, and we get introduced to our cast of characters. One, Rain, JD, Kaplan, and recently transferred RCPD cop Matt, who is not a STARS member. Actually, he's no anything, because we later find out that he had a fake ID. There's a few other commandos there who are just honestly there to be fodder, but that's a good thing. We need fodder in films like this. They cuff the cop and form the amnesiacs of the situation, and quickly head downward into Wonderland. Oh aye, that's another thing. This movie has a Alice in Wonderland allegory motif. The AI is called the Red Queen, the main character is Alice, the hive is Wonderland, which is this hostile environment. Alice at one point sees a rabbit by looking through the glass. Look, it's not the most refined allegory in the world, but I think it's kinda cute. I wonder what that makes the liquor then. Like, the Cheshire Cat, maybe? I don't know. Oh no, wait, his name's Clint, apparently. That was the liquor's on-set name. Clint.
Clint.
But again, it's very quick and to the point. It's one of the things I like most about this film. It's just a very tight, well-paced movie. And as far as adapting the games of the time, I think the scaling of the pace matches really well. The games usually start with a loud and intense intro, and then there's a period of quiet where you're just soaking in the atmosphere and running around empty rooms and halls where the tension builds for a bit. And then the thing reveals itself, and then things just kick into gear for there. And here, that translates quite nicely. There's an intense intro, and then there's the slow rebuild of tension while taking in the atmosphere, then the first encounter happens, and then it just escalates from there, where you get introduced to more threats, figure out how to get in and out of rooms that you're stuck in, uncover more of the dirty truth, and then have a big fiery boss fight at the very end. And the way that they introduced the zombies, while, you know, not the same as the iconic head turn from the first game, is still effectively unsettling. After the Red Queen drops her iconic
You're all going to die down here.
the hive reboots itself, and Rain has an encounter with one of the employees who is just pissed that she's no being paid overtime for this bollocks, and then the rest of the staff slowly start closing in. I fucking love the way that you hear the scraping of the axe on the concrete floor before it's revealed, almost like it's part of the soundtrack.
Wait. Wyatt.
I also think this movie does a really good job creating that sense of claustrophobia from the games, where it sometimes feels like escape is just impossible. Every encounter they have with the zombies in this movie is in a really tight space, which is what the earlier games were almost entirely built around, which is what made them such a challenge. Well, that and the fact that controlling your main character was like instructing your great-granddad through a minefield to find his wooden leg. Even by this point in cinema, I'm sure that people had already been joking about the idea of zombies being so slow that realistically they shouldn't cause that much of a problem. I mean, I can't speak for certainty on that because I wouldn't have been old enough to know. And again, 28 days later hadn't come out yet. But if you were trapped in a subterranean facility comprised of small rooms and tight corridors with very limited directions that you can go, and there are hundreds of them, That's a completely different story. This movie was criticised for being more action oriented than the games are, which, after I played the games, I do not understand that criticism. I mean, firstly, the movie isn't that action heavy. After the first encounter that the characters have with the zombies, they burn through most of their ammunition and are extremely limited for the rest of the film. And look, I know the Resident Evil games are survival horror, but let's be real, they're also action games. Even before the fourth game came out and completely reinvented itself into a more action-focused game, the Resident Evil games have always been action-y to a degree. And honestly, in terms of story and tone, I think they've always come across more like cheesy action films. The characters feel like the leads of campy action films. The game's final act usually involves some sort of intense countdown before an explosion. Fucking hell, at the end of the first game, you kill the final boss by way of bazooka. The games definitely do start with a much more scary horror feel, but by the time you get to the second half, you're dealing with so many different enemy types that you're just burning through that all require much more powerful weaponry, that the horror aspect just feels like it's gone at that point. Oh dear god, I feel so fucking feeble and defenseless knowing that my only form of defense is that grenade launcher with 3 different types of ammunition.
Oh aye, what's that, acid now?
I think the movie looks pretty good as well, and I know, like I mentioned before, it's a very different aesthetic from the game. It's very early 2000s, but it is doing it well. The creature effects are kinda hit and miss. The zombies aren't anything special, and like I said before, a bit of criticism levelled at this from the fan base was the lack of many of the game's creatures. There's no tyrants, there's no giant snakes, there's no spiders, there's no moths, there's no whatever the fuck these things are. But considering the budget, I do think that they did the most with what they were limited to. The CGI on the cunning linguist varies from shot to shot, I would say, whose name is Clint, in case you forgot. Design-wise, I think it's pretty spot on. For some reason, I can't figure out why, but like the faster it moves, I think the worse it looks. Like when it first breaks out of the chamber, I think it looks pretty bad, but in later shots, like when it kills Spence without the R, it looks pretty good, I think. I do like the way that they use Clint as a looming threat throughout the movie before being faced as the final boss. I don't like its weird fucking final form look though, but I suppose that's on brand for Resident Evil as well.
A lot of it is all based on real stuff. You know, the way the skin's been sculpted is based on anatomical real skin. It's because it's a mixture of real creatures that's been put together genetically.
The Cerberus dogs look fucking amazing. Now, I hate these wee bastards in the games. They are the most annoying enemy types, particularly in the earlier games, but I fucking love that they actually just got a bunch of Dobermans and covered them in makeup and meat, which was apparently a nightmare to film because the dogs just kept eating the makeup off themselves and each other. It's probably why they are kept to just one scene, and it is very short admittedly, but it still looks great regardless. I love how this first one makes a dramatic entrance and gives Alice a quick stare down before charging. Apparently they did manage to actually get the dog to jump through the sugar glass window. That's impressive. And Alice gives the rest of them the Christy Gnome treatment, and this Matrix wall run kick is just the stupid fucking cherry on top, which I think might have been a reference to when Wesker did something very similar in Code Veronica. This stunt apparently took like 3 months of Mila Jovovich to train for and actually achieve. That's actually pretty cool. I know Mila Jovovich is one of those actors who always gets a lot of shite flung her way, but she's a very committed performer and she's always given it in her role. Same as Michelle Rodriguez. I mean, sure, she mostly plays the same character in every movie that she's in, but she's good at it. Jason Statham pretty much plays the same character in every movie he's in, and he's good at it. Some actors just do that, they just stick to what they know and they're good at it. I actually do think she is quite good in this though, because her character Rain starts off as her typical cocky tomboyish self, and then she gets infected quite early on and slowly becomes more and more weak as the movie progresses until she eventually just seems to completely give up, and I think she sells it pretty well. I always remember finding it ridiculous that she gets bitten so early on and goes the entire film without turning, but looking at it now I don't think it's weird at all, because they never really state how long it takes for an infected person to fully turn. Also, the more zombie media that I've consumed over the years, it's one of those details that I'm not too hung up on unless they give you like explicit information, like in 28 Days Later for example, where they say you've got like 30 seconds before you turn. But in other ones they don't usually give you the actual time limit. Maybe some people's immune systems are just more resilient than others. Maybe it depends on your BMI levels. I don't fucking know. Also, she wasn't even infected for that long either. When they enter the hive, they say that they have like 3 hours before the entrance closes, and it's like a little while after that she gets bitten. And she turns like minutes before the countdown is over. So she was infected for like an hour and a half or 2 hours tops. Like, that's not a very long time. The characters in general aren't exactly the most vivid, but they do feel suitably Resident Evil. One thing I do like about the approach that they took here is that every character, with the exception of Matt, is an employee of Umbrella, but most of them are in the dark about the real goings-on of the company and discover firsthand the real horrible stuff that's been going on, and the fact that the company could give two shits about their lives. I mean, I feel like that would be very easy to figure out about Umbrella. I've always found that very funny about the games as well, that Umbrella apparently like masquerades as like a pharmaceutical healthcare company, but it's secretly this biotech research thing underneath, which, okay, I get it, that's a secret, but they do seem to have their own private militia, which no one seems to question. Like, I guess no one just knows about that either. I don't know, it just makes me wonder what the fuck Boots has got going on beneath the surface. I know that the fan base of Resident Evil kinda hates Alice as a character, and I get why, especially when you get to the sequels and they basically turn her into a cross between Neo and Lara Croft, leaving pretty much every other character they introduce, including the ones from the games, with basically nothing to do. But this version of the character I think is pretty solid. Like the other characters, she works for Umbrella, and upon discovering its dirty secrets, decided to try and help expose them by allying herself with environmental activists who are trying to reach the same goal. She's like a mix between Claire and Ada. Even visually as well. She's got a red dress like Ada, but a leather jacket like Claire. It's a very Resident Evil look is all I'm saying. She looks cool. I honestly think if this was the only movie that existed, or stuck to its original idea of being a prequel and never got a follow-up, I think the fan base would be a bit more forgiving towards this character. And sure, the whole wall jump kung fu bullshit is kinda goofy, but so fucking what? Resident Evil 4 came out a couple of years after this, and everybody loved it when Leon was roundhousing and suplexing his way through a village of tapeworm infested Spaniards, but Alice doing a Chun-Li kick to a Doberman's schnoz, that was a bit too much apparently. Speaking of Resident Evil 4, we cannot talk about this movie without talking about the awesome laser room scene. Yeah, this was the other scene I was talking about earlier. So this movie decided to add an extra layer to Umbrella's whole list of bio/technological advancements by bringing highly advanced, deeply sophisticated AI into the equation in the form of the Red Queen, which I'm assuming was probably a point of contention for the fanbase since this sort of thing wasn't in the Resident Evil games, and still isn't as far as I'm aware. But come on now, considering what Umbrella is capable of in both the movies and the games, is it that much of a stretch that they would also have access to advanced AI? I do like that the movie doesn't necessarily frame the AI itself as like the overarching villain of the story. It's still very much, you know, the corporate evil of Umbrella itself. The Red Queen's just doing her job after all. However, that does not stop her from being an absolute fucking savage in this sequence. So in the Commando's attempt to reach the Red Queen's chamber, she activates her defences and seals several of the team in the corridor and proceeds to just slice and dice the poor bastards. The best part about it is that she is such a dick about it, because as we discover at the end of the scene, she is capable of making a netted web-like laser pattern that covers the corridor from top to bottom, but because she felt like giving these poor bastards a false sense of hope, she decides to use one straight laser on the first few. I love how on the second run, the laser stays really close to the ground, but as the guy jumps to try and avoid it, the laser quickly rises with him and cuts him off at the waist. And then she gets really fucking petty because the team leader was able to successfully dodge the laser.
I missed. I never miss. Bullseye. Huh?
I love this guy, he's awesome. If there's any one person in this movie I think deserves more credit, it's definitely this guy. He's credited as one, although in the end he was more like 1,000. It's a quick, intense scene that is so iconic at this point that Resident Evil 4 even decided to reference it, although Leon was able to successfully parkour his way through the lasers. I don't know how he would have fared in this corridor though. Knowing Leon, he'd probably just kick the laser and say something stupid.
I really don't give a damn.
The Red Queen is such a fun character. I don't know who's voicing her, but she's always got this like smart arse tone to her voice. Like, who thought it was a good idea to program an advanced supercomputer with this levelly attitude?
Ah, there you are. Things, I gather, have gone out of control. I don't think so. I've been a bad, bad girl. I don't deal in chance. Do it! Kill her!
Do it!
Kill her now! Kill her!
Shut up, bitch!
Apparently they did plan to have the White Queen AI in this movie as an opposing force to the Red Queen, but they decided against it. She does make an appearance down the line though. Why are all of the AIs in this universe modelled after children? I don't know, ask Wesker, or Isaacs, or Ashcroft, or whoever the fuck's in charge of Umbrella in this version of things. I know the later movies do explain why the AIs look like they do, but they never had any of that shit in mind when they came up with these earlier films. As for the whole thing with Spence, I suppose it is, very on brand for Resident Evil to reveal that someone among you has a dirty secret. If there's one thing that I absolutely love about the Resident Evil games, it's the campy villains. Now, this guy is not nearly gone hard enough to qualify for the list of best deliciously over-the-top Resident Evil villains, and it's pretty obvious that the reveal is going to be that he was the guy who set the virus loose, mainly because it can literally only be him. I do find this guy's performance really odd though. Like, for the most part, he's playing it very straight and sincere, but he has this moment that I find very funny when they all first get attacked by the zombies and Kaplan is trying to unlock the elevator door, and Spence is just standing there completely unfazed, watching the carnage like he's a bored dad at his son's school assembly or something, giving Kaplan the most insincere commentary I've ever heard.
You waited?
Didn't know the code.
Shit!
Come on, hurry up.
Shit!
Come on, man.
Hope all this humping and sweating is not disturbing your Royal Highness.
I don't even think this guy has amnesia. I think he's just pretending. Actually, do you know what? No, I think he does have amnesia, but the only thing he legitimately forgot was where the virus is, and so he just has to backtrack to the lab to see if it's there. And when he sees that it isn't there, that's when he remembers, oh shite, I left it on the train. Do you know what else I love in this movie? And I cannot believe I've gone this long without mentioning it. It is the fucking soundtrack. And no, I'm not talking about all of the snippets of licensed heavy metal songs throughout the movie and in the credits. I mean the original score. The Resident Evil games are known for their very atmospheric, sometimes even eerily soothing soundtracks. Funny thing, even though I never played any of the games for a very long time, I was very familiar with a few of their soundtracks. Those save room themes are just sublime. And when I eventually got around to playing Resident Evil Nemesis and heard that absolutely mesmerising end credit song, I was like, this better be in the fucking remake. I'm not playing it anytime soon because I've got like 8 other games to go through first, but you better believe I'm going to be listening out for that when I get there. Thankfully, it was. But this movie honestly has one of the best horror theme songs ever. I would honestly put it up there with the likes of Halloween, Saw, Exorcist, Candyman, like as a horror theme song. It's just that good, and it fits Resident Evil perfectly. But outside of the main theme, the rest of the score is just atmospheric ooze to the eardrums. Even the more like action heavy tracks sound incredible. Some of them ironically do sound like they would fit right into Devil May Cry though. Also, I think the movie has a pretty cool ending. Now I know, like what Paul W.S. Anderson did with Mortal Kombat, It's a sequel baiting ending, sure, but I don't know, there's just something kind of cute about movies sequel baiting from back in these days. For some reason it feels different from the way they do it now. I mean, it paid off for them because they got 5 fucking sequels out of this. Also, I do just sometimes love it when a horror movie ends on such a grim note. Like, after going through this entire movie with the goal of both keeping the infection from reaching the surface and exposing Umbrella, both of those things fail, and you just have to now deal with the fallout. And I think teasing Nemesis was kinda neat. I like how you see the wee tendrils growing out of Matt's arm wound, which I would assume is meant to be a reference to Nemesis' tentacle fingers. It's a shame he doesn't actually have them in the next movie, but whatever. The real shame though, I feel, is that this movie just has the unfortunate position of being the first in a 6-film franchise that would continuously fumble its attempts at fan service. I think if this movie had stuck to the initial idea of being a prequel and never got any sequels that would just keep introducing characters from the game and have them do literally nothing, or even just never introduced the characters from the game and stuck to making its own characters up, a lot more fans would look back on this a bit more fondly. There'd probably be like fucking Reddit pages or something trying to figure out how you could fit them into canon. I think even now, after so many other entries into the games, this movie taken by itself very well could fit into continuity. I mean, don't take my word on that, because I haven't played every spin-off in the series and I don't remember the finer details of the game's continuity. I didn't even know if those animated Netflix movies are canon to the games, are they? But regardless, I still think this is a solid movie. And no, it doesn't have the characters or the aesthetic of the games, but it very much has the same DNA. It's got horror, action, great atmosphere, a tight claustrophobic environment, a good cast, cheesy one-liners.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
I'm missing you already.
It's well paced, the effects range from decent for the time to genuinely terrific, it has an incredible soundtrack, the characters are a bit prosaic, sure, but they are perfectly suited for a Resident Evil romp. But aye, I like this movie, and I honestly like it a bit more after playing through all the games. It's definitely up there as one of the much better video game to film adaptations. James Cameron claims it's one of his biggest guilty pleasure movies. To which I say, there's nothing to feel guilty about, James, this movie's a genuine pleasure. As for the sequels, well, they're a different story.